All right, let's call the meeting to order. If you will all please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we'll call the meeting to order for this Wednesday, December 19th of the Planning Commission. If you'll all bear with me, I've got a paragraph I have to read with regard to process and procedure for this evening's meeting. This is a regular meeting of the City of Milton Planning Commission. I'm Paul Moore, Chairman. This is a 7-member commission appointed to the City of Milton Mayor and City Council, or by the City of Milton Mayor and City Council, created for the purpose of holding public hearings and making recommendations on zoning, rezoning, use permits, concurrent variance applications, comprehensive land use plan and plan map, and other related plans and amendments to the zoning ordinance. I'd like to introduce the members of the Planning Commission here this evening. To my far left, Samit Shah, Fred Edwards. I'd like to welcome Kurt Nolte as our newest member. We'll speak to that in just a minute. To my right, Mark Bittner and Ron Gilbert. The petitions will be heard in sequence listed on the posted agenda. I would like to acquaint you with some of the rules and procedures conducting this meeting. The applicant and all those speaking in support of an application will be allowed a total of 10 minutes to present the petition. The applicant may choose to save some of the time for rebuttal following the presentation by the opposition. The opposition will be allowed a total of 10 minutes to present its position. If time remains, the opposition will be allowed to rebut. Since the burden of proof is upon the applicant will be allowed to make closing remarks provided time remains within the allotted time. The staff of the Community Development Department will be keeping track of the time and will inform you periodically of the remaining time for your presentation. Each speaker must fill out a speaker card before speaking and leave it with a staff member of the Community Development Department. All speakers will identify themselves by name, address, and organization, if applicable, before beginning their presentation. When an opponent of a rezoning action has made within the 2 years immediately preceding the filing of the rezoning action being opposed, campaign contributions aggregating $250 or more to a local government official by the local government which will consider the application, it should be the duty of the opponent to file a disclosure with the governing authority of the respective local government at least 5 days prior to the Planning Commission meeting. A violation of the relevant state statute constitutes a misdemeanor. Therefore, if you have contributed $250 or more to a council member and you have not filed a disclosure prior to the Planning Commission meeting, the city attorney strongly suggests you have someone else speak on your point of view. The application has been properly filed with the Department of Community Development. Signs have been posted on each site. The matter has been advertised and the notices have been mailed to property owners affected by this zoning as required by the Milton zoning ordinance. The Planning Commission's recommendation will be forwarded to the City of Milton Mayor and City Council for the final disposition. The City Council hearing will be held approximately 3.5 weeks from this hearing on the third Monday of each month at 6 p.m. in these council chambers. The Community Development Department has reviewed each application in conjunction with various agencies and departments, both internal and external to the city. Staff's recommendations, findings, and conclusions are here before us in written form, which has been made available to all petitioners and to the public. Demonstration of any sort within the chamber is prohibited, so please refrain from any applause, dialogue with the person speaking, or outburst. Please turn off all cell phones or place them on silent. All remarks will be addressed by the Planning Commission. Please show the same respect to the person speaking that you'll expect to receive yourself. In addition, the applicant shall not submit material to the Planning Commission during the meeting unless requested to do so by the Commission. All material that you wish to be reviewed by the Commission in consideration of your application should be submitted to the staff of the Community Development Department to be included in the normal distribution of packets to the Commission. Finally, to the applicant, if your petition is deferred in accordance with the Milton zoning ordinance, you are required to update or obtain a new sign for reposting. Failure to update or repost will result in further delay, and there are no exceptions. At this point, it's the opportunity for public comment. If there's anyone who would like to speak this evening into the record on a topic that is not listed on our agenda, this is the time to do so.
Yeah, I don't have any general public comment.
Okay, then we'll close public comment for this evening. So the next item on our agenda is the approval of the action minutes from the October 24th meeting. Hope everybody's had a chance to review them. I would entertain a motion.
I'll move that we accept the minutes from the Wednesday, October 24th planning meeting.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you. I'd like to take a moment before we begin our regular agenda, Robin, and I don't see Heather in our audience this evening. We'd just like to thank Heather Sparks, who has been serving on the Planning Commission in the last, approximately the last year. She has served us well. She brought great guidance to the city and has made a significant contribution to the outcome on the behalf of the citizens. She had a great ear for what was going on in the community and represented the community well. We'd like to thank her for her service. We'd also like to welcome Kurt Nolte, our newest member, taking Heather's place. Heather is stepping on to a new responsibility in Forsyth County on a formal basis, which I think she's decided is a bit of a conflict and has precluded her from continuing her duties. Kurt is a 20-plus year member of the community from Oxford Lakes, so he's probably the furthest west representation that we have ever had on this commission. And Kurt has raised a family of 3 children here in the Milton schools. All have gone on to make a wonderful contribution as contributing members of society. He and his wife, Julie, are a real blessing to the community. Kurt has served in a capacity of homeowners association president or vice president, variety of roles. He coaches a variety of sports and teams in the Milton area and has served our community well. So we welcome Kurt as Peyton Jamison's appointee to the Planning Commission.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So Robin, would you please sound the first item on our agenda this evening? Do I need to read the statement first before we do that?
Yeah, the preliminary plat one, yes, please.
Okay, so we're hearing a preliminary plat this evening is the first item on our agenda. So there's a statement I need to read into the record so everybody understands how we deal with preliminary plats. The Planning Commission is tasked by the city's subdivision ordinance to conduct a public hearing on proposed preliminary plats that have been found to be complete by the Community Development Department. At the conclusion of the public hearing, the Planning Commission is required to review the proposed preliminary plat and provide comments and make recommendations regarding the plat to the Community Development Director. The Planning Commission does not approve or reject proposed preliminary plats, but merely provides comments or recommendations based on the public hearing and the Planning Commission's review of the proposed preliminary plat. Okay. So Robin, if you will.
This proposed subdivision is named by the developer Old Field. It's located, as you can see on the map, on the south side of Francis, just east of Cogburn Road. It is owned by Georgia Tennessee Development Partners, LLC, and the site planner is Reese Hoops and Fincher. It contains approximately 10.2 acres. It currently has a single-family residence on the site, and the proposal is for 7 single-family lots with a density of 0.69 units per acre, and it is zoned AG1. You might think it looks a little familiar because it is familiar. This property had been before you. I believe it actually got to you as a private school application, and it was withdrawn about a year and a half ago. So this is the site plan. It's fairly simple. There is one road coming in. It's been aligned as close as possible to the opposite subdivision across the street to the north. It preserves the rural Milton view shed. There's 40 foot and then an additional 20 foot, and then any kind of improvements such as a septic area. outside of that 60 feet. And as I said, there's 7 lots, as you see. This is a 50-foot setback, which is required by the zoning ordinance for new roads adjacent to property lines. So that's why there's this 50-foot width along the south. Well, actually, it would be the west. Thank you. And then further in the back is a detention area. We require it to be as natural as possible. It won't be a bathtub. So that's why it's fairly large in shape. So it won't be very deep, but have as naturalistic as possible. And then obviously you see each of these lots. They've kind of programmed it for a fairly large house, and the applicant or the developer is here to answer any specific questions that you might have. And they've kind of also shown that there's room for a pool, as well as the primary and secondary septic areas. And they're obviously all minimum 1 acre lots. Let's see. So based on the submitted site plans and supplemental information, the proposed preliminary plat meets the requirements of the applicable city codes as they pertain to development of this property. So, and the applicant has indicated he'll just be available to answer questions, and I do have some people who would like to speak on it. So.
Great. Thanks, Robin. So if the applicant would come forward, please.
I think he just wanted to be able to answer questions, unless you have questions.
Actually, I've got a couple questions for the applicant. And there are community member questions as well,
yes,
Robin?
they have comments. Yeah, I have some comments from the community as well.
Thank you. If you would state your name and address for the record, please.
Guy Cherwonick. I'm the manager of Georgia-Tennessee Development Partners.
Great. Thanks, Guy. Actually, just want to go down the table. Smeet, do you have any questions this evening?
I have anything right now.
Okay.
I just have a couple of questions. How does the reserve septic field work when you have a primary?
The reserve is designed as an event that the primary fails. So in 10 years from now, for some reason, there's a failure. The ordinance requires that you have land that's been dedicated and carved out. So practically, it should never be used if your system is managed and maintained correctly. But there's always that what if. That's why that's a requirement.
Okay, so there's no hookup or anything. It's just there. If it's needed, you could then
correct
run the pipes.
Yes, that's correct. The real estate's just
that area.
Correct. The real estate's just carved out for the future.
The only other question I had, maybe and I'm misreading it, on lot number 7. I tried to figure out where the driveway was into that location, into the garage.
So, do you want to look at who that question about? I mean, it's 7.
These are just concept HLPs, house location plans. So one of the requirements Milton likes to see is that you've thought it through. We can't say that this is exactly what the house configuration is going to be, but we could most probably will run the driveway on the left side of that lot. Of that one. Okay. Correct. One thing I would like to note is in the rear where it says detention, that's stormwater. We are going to we're going to handle water quality and stormwater in that location. And it's going to be a wet pond, so we're going to dig out probably an extra 40,000 cubic yards of material to create a little pond back there. So that the intent is to make it really natural. We're completely against what a lot of folks do, which is just carve out small real estate for detention, and it's an eyesore. It's unsafe. You're forced to put a fence around it. And the detention ponds I've done in Cobb County and Fulton County, they've all been features. And unless you're an engineer or one of you guys, you're like, you don't even realize that it becomes an amenity for the community. So that's the intent of and we've worked with your Milton engineers to try to achieve that, or we'll work with them.
That's all I have.
Okay, Kurt. Okay. Where?
One question. The aerial view showed that the plat is wooded. Could you speak momentarily about the any specimen trees that may be on the lot, and also your plan for tree canopy?
Yes, we have done all the preliminary calculations on what to meet the tree ordinance. Once we've developed put the road in, the emphasis on the tree canopy and buffers would be towards the subdivisions that we border. We have a 50-foot strip that we have between our road, and we're going to grade and plant trees there. But we're not anticipating any problem meeting tree canopy. We have a lot of trees on the site.
Are there specimen trees?
Yes, there are, and we've surveyed those, and we're planning how to replant or if we can't plant on site, we'll have another site where we will plant them.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm sorry, say the last statement again. You can't put them there, they'll go.
Right. Our understanding is if we can't plant them, we have to pay the tree bank. But
Right.
we've also understand from Milton that if we have another site in Milton, which we're working on, that we could use those trees at that location.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that consideration. I've got a couple questions as well. One of them had to do with the reference to pond rather than detention, or the fact that it says both. I appreciate the fact that you're contemplating a pond.
Right.
So all too often they just become nothing but a weed farm that's an eyesore and unattended. So thank you for doing that. One of the questions I've got has to do with that access, though. Will it be public access to the pond then? Is that going to be a common area that people can get to?
Yes. First of all, we have to provide access for the city. That's a requirement. The city has to have access to all stormwater facilities. Just in the event of a heavy storm, they have to make sure they can maintain it if there's a problem. But yes, the intent is to create a walking path or trail, and we're working with the property owner to the west, who has 4+ acres, and that's in development. And as that gets further developed, we'll come forward with another plan. Right now, that has not been nailed down, but the rear yards of lot 5, 6, and 7, there's an additional 4+ acres, and that would be added to this our amenity concept.
I'm sorry, say that last part one more time for me. Behind 5, 6, and 7, there's additional acreage?
There is, and we've talked to the planning department we've talked to staff about that, but because we don't have an agreement, a concrete agreement with that, we're not going to present that now, but we would anticipate that we would, if we do get that agreement, which we feel good about, we'd come back before this group with a modification to the plan.
In that potential acquisition, it looks like the parcel immediately adjacent to you is larger than probably that acreage you're referring to. Is that potential whole parcel in play immediately adjacent to you to the east?
No, just about 4 acres.
Okay. And that's all wooded today?
Correct.
As well. Okay. So again, my second question is in keeping with the question that Ron asked. In the common area that's on what I would determine as the western side of the property, that's all pretty heavily wooded today. So it's your intention at this point, I think I heard you say, to clear and grade that so all the trees will go away?
No, to the west, meaning not on the house side, on the opposite side?
I'm sorry?
You mean on the opposite side of where the houses are?
Yes.
No, the intent is to not to grade that. We might plant additional trees there, but we would not want to disturb that.
Okay, great. So common area is just referring to the fact that within the treed area,
Correct.
that will be a green
Right.
space area.
Right,
that
yeah.
can be
It's not in
common
our
use.
best interest to clear that at all.
Well, nor is it in ours. So
Nor the neighbors that we border.
Yeah, we'd love to keep it as wooded as possible.
Absolutely.
Which actually was going to go down the line of my next question, which was actually a question for staff. Robin, I'm assuming that the placement of the drive primarily is driven by the fact that we're trying to keep it as close to the property access across the street.
Correct,
as
yes.
well.
So it's all been driven by that, so yes.
And the reason I was asking that is if you were to, had the applicant said something other than the fact that he intended to keep most of that treed, I was going to express an interest in trying to find a way to move the street to the other side because the other side is not developed.
Yeah,
But
no, it's driven by the engineering, so it has to be there.
Okay. It's referenced on here, or one of our maps, as a private road. Is it intended to be a private road, or will it be public road for the neighborhood?
Right now, the plan is a private road.
So gated or ungated?
The plan is we're still trying to decide that. We have an option for a gate. We have that gate option.
Okay. Last question I've got has to do with the maps that we've got. We've got are depicting a 4-board fence, and is that going to run the length of the drive and then also separate all the properties?
I would anticipate, yes.
I know it's theoretical at this point.
Yes,
It's not hard and fast, but is that that's what's depicted on the maps that we've got. So if we're
Yes.
trying to present to the community some of the expectations that they should have.
That's a good look. I like that look. It works well in the communities in Milton where they've used that, and we're going to copy that.
Have you got a targeted price point at this point for the community? Or square footage?
The square footage will be a minimum 3,600 square feet. The average price, the starting price point would be $750.
Okay. Great. Thank you. So I think unless if I can speak on behalf of the commission, and please supplement as appropriate. We, number one, appreciate what you're doing. It looks like a project that's consistent with Milton. We ask that you do seriously consider the minimization of the removal of the trees to preserve the look and feel of what's there today, which is heavily wooded. And then ask that you hold true to your suggested word, which is going to be something as a water feature rather than just a detention area.
Right.
And thank you. Robin, I think at this point, if there's comments from the community, we should entertain those as well.
Yes.
Unless anybody else has any other comments before that? No questions?
No.
Thank you.
The first speaker is Karen Bottoms.
Hi, my name is Karen Bottoms. I live at 14680 Glen Creek Way, just around the corner from the project. Mostly you've attached to his comments what I have. There's some really nice specimen trees that need to be saved there. You know, it's easy to cut them down, but it takes a long time to grow them back. And we don't want to see just a flat area like it is across from Cambridge High School. On the reserve field, I would like to see possibly that be an undisturbed area when they're building these houses out. And in the future, should the secondary septic needed, then they can clear the area. But at least it would give us a little bit more pervious area for the water to absorb in. 10 acres is a lot of trees there, and if you start cutting them down, then we do have water issues. And despite the detention pond and stuff, there are issues of water going someplace. And if you put a whole bunch of cement and houses and pools and stuff like that, there's no place for the water to be absorbed in. And yeah, there's detention ponds, but nevertheless, I've seen it where it does go back into the creeks and backs up into the waterways. I'd also like to ask that there be no curbs on the street and that we use swales to help contain the water a bit. Let's see. I think that's about really all I have is like just a little bit more environmental concerns there for not clear cutting. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, the next speaker is Andrew Youngs.
My name's Andrew Youngs. I live at 2793 Francis Road, which is immediately adjacent to this property. To the east, just right there near house number 1 and number 2. I've lived in this area for only a year and a half, but I came to Atlanta from Southern California to escape the crowd. And it seems like I'm right back in the crowd. We were looking at homes in closer to the perimeter, and then someone said, hey, take a look at Milton. So we did. We came out here because of the equestrian lifestyle and the ambiance of the rolling open spaces, and I fear that that's in jeopardy. I I knew that this property would be developed, but I had no idea it would be an enclave type development. I thought that it would be more of an estate type development. So at any rate, I am not against development at all. In fact, I appreciate it and I welcome it. But I have concerns about 7 homes going in. And it's my understanding that it was suggested to this developer to put in fewer than 7, but that was not accepted. I think it might be worth a try again. Now, a couple of things that I have heard today answer some of my questions. As I look at this proposed plat, the homes are just concept homes. So as far as where and what type, or not where, but what type, what they're going to architecturally look like, how, I guess we learned today how large they're going to be. But a lot of this is just concept. For instance, the pool, I guess it's just concept 2 to show that a pool could go in. I noticed that some of the build lines seem to be odd, especially on house number 1. We've got build lines that, although house number 1, like all the other homes, has a side load garage, that's designated as the backyard. That's rear. So it pushes that house 25 feet closer to my property. I don't know why exactly, except for this entrance configuration, but I was once an engineer and I did a little measuring here. That home can be moved toward the street, further toward the street, and still be within the build lines. Now, a couple other things I wonder about as I read this. It talks about green space, and I take it the green space is the common area along the street. Is that correct? Common area along the proposed street. It also then goes on to talk about green space without park. I have no idea what that means. Without park. Where is there a park? Also, I'm wondering about the discussion of the properties mentioned down behind homes 4 through 7. That acreage, I know those people that live there. We've had discussions about that property. I think it's going to be held pretty close to home. Now, I don't have a crystal ball, but to think that, oh yes, we've got the potential to expand further back there, I'm not sure that that's true. So what I'm feeling from this meeting is that this proposal is still very much in the infancy stages, and there's a lot to be hashed out. So I'd like to keep on top of this because it's definitely going to affect me, and I just want to say that I do have concerns. I understand that it meets all the official guidelines, but I'm not sure that it meets the spirit of Gilton's mission plan and Milton's mission statement. So, something to consider. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
The next speaker is Brian Corman, I believe. Corman. That's fine. Thank you.
Hi, yes, I'm Brian Corman. I am in the Clearbrook subdivision that is directly adjacent to this property. Specifically, I'm on Timber Point, which 14663 Timber Point, which is at the very south part of that proposed development, which is where the retention pond is.
That was your address that you just gave us?
Yes, 14663 Timber Point.
Okay. Thank you.
My concern in general is that retention pond, because that, and I don't have a topology map, and I'm not an expert, but I live right there, and there is a creek that comes through there, and that area slopes off very severely. I don't know how you would put a retention pond there without building a wall or some huge berm. The whole property slopes. I'm sure there's going to have to be a lot of fill dirt and other things to kind of level this out, because to me, it doesn't even really look, I mean, like I said, I'm not an expert, but it's going to be challenging to build the way it drops off. It very much slopes, but it already bottoms out into kind of a dirty creek area, goes under a road, which is my road, down into Cricket Creek. So the challenge that I see is building a decent-looking retention pond that doesn't look like it's bermed very high, which would be a safety hazard because there are children in my neighborhood. I've got children. And then directly across the street from me is the property that the prior gentleman was speaking to, which is also undeveloped, heavily wooded. So just consideration for that. I know it's not here for today, but it is a very nice piece of property. All of that is heavily wooded, and it looks like it's very high density, but my primary concern is that retention pond and making that. I don't see how you could just gradually berm that and have it look natural. You're going to have to build something pretty substantial to hold that water in the way it drops off. So no further comment. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
That's all the public comment.
Okay, thank you. I will close public comment. Robin, I have a question for you based on one of the questions that was, or one of the comments made by the community this evening. That was the ability for the reserve field not to be cleared. What is our standard action on that when it is? Is it?
I mean, we don't have any regulations to that. I mean, typically people like to have a backyard. It would really be up to the developer to put on something on the deeds or on the HOA docs to say that, to put on the plat that certain areas shall be preserved. But we don't have any rules and regulations that would be the case. So it's really upon the developer to make those rules.
Okay. It may serve to their advantage if there are specimen trees in those areas to not clear that area with regard to the
there may be grading and weather, depending on the topo and the drainage. And at this point, it's really upon the developer and whether it can work engineering wise and whether he desires to do that, because typically most people want to have a yard. So.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. There was one more question I was going to ask you. And it's escaped me for the moment. Any other comments from the DS? Otherwise, I would just amend my earlier comments to, if staff would please carry forward the following things just for consideration as this plat goes through the process. Here, this is my question. Robin, with the AG1 enhancements that we had talked about, one of the things that was up for consideration was trying to minimize curb versus swale, as suggested by,
let me address that.
Ms. Bottoms.
Okay. So when you do it, that's called a rural section.
Mm-hmm.
And to do a swale and to do no curb requires a larger right-of-way, 70, 75 feet. So in this particular situation, he's not required to do that. And it really would not work on this piece of property. So yes, it's a possibility for certain properties, but in this situation, the way it's designed, he wouldn't be able to meet the 50-foot setback because the right-of-way would be another 25 feet.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for the answer to that. So the four notes that I took from the comments from the community are, again, just for consideration, carrying it forward, whether it's something that can be met or not. If you would just have some of these things carried forward as it's reviewed by city engineers and or staff. One is the use of swales versus curb and gutter. Second is the consideration for the engineering on the back end of the property for the slope expressed by, I think, by Mr. Corman. Concern where the detention pond is going, whether or not, I know it has to be engineered and staff will do the appropriate engineering.
Right, I mean,
to
it
make
all
sure
has to be engineered correctly, yes.
So just make sure that gets carried forward. Third is tree preservation to ensure that we've got a good specimen map of the trees that we would hope to save. And then last is just, again, consideration as noted earlier in my comments about the ability to not necessarily clear the reserve fields if that's possible for the developer to consider that. Is there anything that didn't capture that's on anybody else's mind? Okay, just to remind the community, because this is a preliminary plat hearing, we do not make any formal vote on this. We simply make suggestions that staff carry forward.
Yeah, actually you do. I think the last time we did take a vote, looking through the ordinance, we would like a vote of, and you can make those suggestions and just say that you would recommend it continue on and that with these suggestions. So we would like a vote, actually.
All right. Well, then I'll ask for a motion to put forward those considerations, I guess, Robin, with the support of the plat as presented. All right. Well, that's not typically a motion that comes from the chair. So if there's a motion that I can have from the table to consider those things. Mr. Gilbert?
I would move forward with it.
Put your mic forward.
For approval of this preliminary plat, subject to the points that the chair outlined a moment ago.
Great. Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that's unanimous.
Okay. So I just want to, this reminded me of a situation about doing as natural as possible. Sweet Apple subdivision on Ebenezer, which a few years ago came about trying to do a conservation subdivision. It didn't happen. But I spoke to the developer, and he said it's a very interesting situation and that they do have regulations to when they sell the lot that they develop the subdivision in such a way to preserve as many trees as possible and the least amount of grading. And so basically, if somebody comes in looking for a lot and a house and they say, we want a yard, we want a swimming pool, we want to do X, Y, and Z, he says, well, this is not the subdivision for you, which is kind of amazing, actually.
Right.
And so, but then there's a lot of people who like and prefer that look, as well as I think it's one of the few subdivisions in the state, if the only one, that they have solar panels on their houses too as well. So they're trying to be as green as possible. But I thought that was a very interesting comment, that it's really driven by the developer and how he prefers to develop it. I mean, it's a much larger piece, and they do have some of the natural swales and everything, but it is not the place where people want to put their jungle gym and swimming pool, but it's really meant for something that's very natural and holistic. So just, if you guys want to go out there and look at it, I think it's a great example of being as, natural as possible while still having to put in a septic field and everything else. So anyway.
Great. Thanks, Robin.
Okay.
All right. If you would please sound the next item.
Okay, the next item is RZ 1814, BC 1809, 3475, 3485, 3495, 3499, and 3501, Bethany Bend, by Bajan American Properties to rezone from TR and AG1 to TR to develop 54 residential units as a condominium type sale at a density of 6.38 units per acre and a 3-part concurrent variance to 1, delete the 75-foot undisturbed buffer and 10-foot improvement setback and replace with a 20-foot landscape buffer or 50-foot undisturbed stream buffer adjacent to all property lines abutting property zoned TR. And 2, to delete the requirement for 75% vertical wall plane of brick or natural stone, and to delete the requirement for 25% brick tile and remaining materials listed in section 641095P. So let me go ahead and start the presentation, and then we'll go from there. Okay. So as mentioned in the item number, this is on Bethany Bend Road. It's several parcels being put together as one, right there just above McGinnis Ferry. And right where the traffic circle is, and Mr. Rowe, who's the engineer for the applicant, has stated that AT&T has finally moved their lines so they can proceed with the continuation of that construction of that roundabout that is being initiated on the Forsyth side with that large mixed-use development. So again, as stated, this is a request to rezone from TR and AG1 to townhouse residential to develop 54 townhomes on 8.46 acres at a density of 6.38 units per acre. And they also are requesting a 3-part variance, which we'll discuss later in the summary. There are 4 existing single-family residences, and it is currently zoned AG1 and TR, and specifically I want to speak to the TR zoning that was before you in 2008, and a use permit associated with it for senior living at a density, it was approved at a density of 19.84 units per acre. And I believe ultimately they got 3-story permission. They came back for a variance for the height later on. So that's what's existing as far as zoning on the TR, and then they've acquired options on some other AG1 property. In regards to the future land use, the area that's already zoned TR is MFR, multifamily residential, that just reflects what is the density, which is a multifamily type density. It's fairly high. And HDR2, which is high density residential 2, which is the higher of the 2 categories, and it's residential 5 or more units per acre. And this property is within the State Route 9 overlay district. It is not within the form-based code, or would not be before you. Oh, I did the wrong one. Okay, as you can see, this is the zoning map. This little area to the north is the AG1 parcels. This is the blue is the TR. To the south is the ONI, which is the Milton Montessori.
We're not seeing what are you?
Oh, I need to switch out. Thank you. I'm sorry.
That's right.
Too many things. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you.
Screaming at me like, Robert,
We tried the phone.
what's your problem? We can't see anything. I turned on the monitors this time.
That's right. We do have that,
Yes.
but we were just seeing you.
Yeah.
To the back of your head.
Okay. Let me do something.
Yeah. See if we can ask them to move on. City staff wears a lot of hats, including crowd control.
It's very echoing in there, so it's, yeah. Okay. This is a future land use, and so you can see the dark brown is the high-density residential 2, and the ugly green color is the multifamily. So this is the site plan. It's, as you can see, there's a lot of floodplain. It would be to the west along this area, and then they have their detention. Actually, is that the detention? I will not say whether it's the detention. It's just an open area. And then all the different units within the remainder of it. And then you see the roundabout that's under construction. And they also have proposed a second entrance right here, a little bit further up the development. In regards to the department comments, the transportation engineer has requested to evaluate has requested a traffic memo to the applicant, and we are still awaiting that information, although I think they have some of it tonight. But just to note that the conditions of the zoning would not change based on that information. Also, the city engineer wanted to state that the floodplain didn't show all the way over, and it doesn't impact the actual site, but it just is within that other subdivision that wasn't reflected on the site plan. The city arborist stated that this property would be subject to the tree preservation ordinance, including recompense and tree density requirements. I just want to note that the applicant had submitted the original 2007 tree survey, so we're asking for an updated tree survey because obviously things have grown over the last 10 or 11 years. The fire marshal is just stating that the road shall be minimum 26 feet from back of curve to back of curve, or if less, shall be posted no parking signs and curb painted red. In regards to public involvement, there was a CZIM meeting here over at Community Place. There were 11 attendees. They stated concern with increased traffic, that the architecture should be consistent with other homes on Bethany Bend, concern with separation between existing homes and Hidden Forest subdivision, need to make sure there's some type of protection from car lights entering the subdivision, parking for guests where that would be, issues with the future roundabout, and disturbance of existing wildlife and vegetation. In regards to the Design Review Board courtesy review, on December 4th, they liked the proposed development and design of the building, supported the requested architectural variances for the building material, and noted that the requirement for brick does not need to be, that the brick does need to be cleaned up. So just looking to staff to make a little bit more flexibility in that masonry and brick requirement. In regards to working with the Hidden Forest HOA to decide on a fence that is compatible for both properties. And in regards to the site plan analysis, we'll make these different statements. Staff notes that the site plan shows a variety of unit sizes, grouping size, and architectural design. The majority of larger and wider units are adjacent to Bethany Bend, and the smaller units are toward the back of the property. All of the units are rear-loaded for vehicles, and the site is designed with no dead-end streets. The site provides for a large green open space with walking trails on the southern portion of the site, as well as preserving 3 specimen-sized oaks. Dispersed within the development are smaller greens for the use of the residents. Based on all the requirements that are in your staff report, which there was a plethora of them, the site plan indicates compliance with the development standards for the TR residential district. And the applicant is requesting concurrent variances, and they are actually to the State Route 9 overlay district. And when we look at a variance, they must be based upon credible evidence submitted to staff with 1 through 4. The first application or first request is to delete the 75-foot undisturbed buffer and 10-foot improvement setback and replace with a 20-foot landscape buffer or 50-foot undisturbed stream buffer adjacent to all property lines abutting property zone townhouse residential, which is basically primarily the Hidden Forest property. The applicant has stated that they will install a fence along the abutting property lines to Hidden Forest and provide a landscape plan to help ameliorate the impact of the proposed development. On the site plan, there are areas adjacent to the units 48, 45, 44 through 40, which there's additional room to increase the landscape buffer to 35 feet. In addition, the proposed 54 units at an overall density of 6.38 is consistent with the 2016 comprehensive plan update and compatible with residential properties to the west and northwest. Based on these facts, staff recommendation is that if this request is granted, it would not offend the spirit or intent of the zoning ordinance. The site is comprised of 6 parcels of various sizes and shapes that create an 8.46 acre parcel that is narrow, odd-shaped, and contains approximately 1.4 acres of floodplain on the site. Therefore, it is staff's recommendation that because of these facts, there are extraordinary and exceptional situations or conditions pertaining to this piece of property that the literal or strict application of the zoning ordinance creates an unnecessary hardship due to size, shape, and the floodplain not caused by the applicant. Relief would not cause a substantial detriment to the public good and surrounding properties, and that the public safety, health, and welfare are secured, and substantial justice is done if approved with the following conditions to require a fence adjacent to Hidden Forest based on basically based on discussions between the 2 parties, an increased landscape buffer adjacent to the above-mentioned lots, an agreed landscape plan with abutting property owners. Therefore, staff recommends approval conditional of VC 1809 Part 1. In regards to parts 2 and 3 for the brick and natural stone requirement and for the accent materials, the applicant is requesting relief from the required building materials for townhomes to this requirement. The subject site is located within the State Route 9 overlay district, which includes parcels on Bethany Bend going north towards State Route 9, which is the only area left in the Deerfield area, and State Route 9 not included in the Deerfield Form-Based Code approved by the City Council in 2015. The applicant is requesting the above two-part concurrent variance in order to design the townhomes with a less heavy look of the predominantly brick and stone that is required by the State Route 9 overlay district. Below are sketches that demonstrate the intent of the look as well as the massing and form. So, the applicant's architect has worked closely with the city architect to achieve the most appealing and updated design for the area. The applicant intends to incorporate some brick and stone in the design of the townhomes, but does not intend to utilize the requirements per vertical wall, plane, or the accent materials. The city architect continues to work with the applicant to provide more detailed designs, elevations of the materials for the buildings. Although the applicant has provided good design for the project and worked with the city architect, but does not meet all 4 of the considerations when evaluating a variance. The applicant has not demonstrated the following consideration. Number 2, there are such extraordinary and exceptional situations or conditions pertaining to the particular piece of property that the literal or strict application of the zoning ordinance would create an unnecessary hardship due to size, shape, or topography, or other extraordinary and exceptional situations or conditions not caused by the variance applicant. Therefore, staff recommends denial of VC 1809 parts 2 and 3. If the mayor and city council recommends approval of parts 2 and 3, staff recommends that all architecture be approved by the city architect prior to the submittal to the design review board, which for townhouse attached products have to go to the design review board before a building permit can be approved. In regards to the standard of review, whether the zoning proposal will permit a use that is suitable in view of the use and development of adjacent and nearby property. So as we see here, the subject site is the beige and the blue here. Below to in the pink is the Milton Montessori. To the east is the mixed-use development in Forsyth with very large amounts of multi-use as well, multi-family as well as single-family. And once the interchange is built at McGinnis and 400, that they will begin on the commercial piece of this corner. To the west is Hidden Forest. Further to the southwest is, let me check my cheat sheet, is Fairview Townhomes at 6.25 units per acre. The apartments further to the south, IMT Deerfield, are at 12 units per acre. If we go further to the northwest, which is Spring Valley, they're at 7.86 units per acre. And then a little bit further northwest is Windcrest at 6.76 units per acre. I believe it's whether the zoning proposal will adversely affect the existing use or usability of adjacent or nearby property. It's staff's opinion that the proposal will not adversely affect the existing use of the adjacent properties as described above if approved with the recommended conditions. The proposed development is within the range of existing approved densities and uses in the area. Whether the property to be affected by the proposal has a reasonable economic use is currently zoned. The subject site may have a reasonable use based on the AG1 and the TR for the senior housing. The proposed development may have some impact on existing streets, transportation facilities, and schools. The roundabout that is under construction at the entrance of the project, as well as the additional entrance on the northern portion of the site, will help ameliorate the increase in traffic in and out of the subject site. All three schools will be impacted by the proposed development. This area is currently zoned for Cambridge High, Hopewell Middle, and Cogburn Woods Elementary, and all schools are currently over building capacity, and the project will increase the number over capacity as indicated in the report from the school board. In regards to if the zoning proposal is in conformity with the policies and intent of the land use plan, the future land use plan, as I stated before, is multifamily residential and high HDR2 at 5 units per acre or more. The proposed use is 6.38, which would be consistent with that recommendation, as well as various policies regarding housing, the types of housing, housing opportunities, various choices in housing patterns, and increased opportunities for more affordable owner-occupied housing. In regards to whether there are other existing or changed conditions affecting the use and development of the property, since the last approval for a senior housing use permit in 2008 at a density of 19.84 units per acre, the applicant has included additional acreage, but the amount of floodplain has increased on the site. Secondly, the proposed density is 6.48 units per acre, which is a significant decrease from the existing approved zoning. In addition, there is a mixed-use development under construction on the east side of Bethany Bend and Forsyth, which includes apartments, single-family homes, and future commercial uses directly across the street. Lastly, there's a roundabout under construction which will serve as the primary entrance. Therefore, it is staff's opinion that these change conditions affect the use and development of the property, which supports recommended approval of the proposed rezoning. The proposed use will not be environmentally adverse to the natural resources, environment, and citizens of the city due to the required development regulations as it pertains to stormwater facilities, tree recompense, and open space requirements. Therefore, it's staff's opinion that the proposed rezoning from TR and AG1 to TR to develop 54 townhomes is consistent with the 2016 future land use plan, update and plan policies, as well as providing an appropriate transition from lower density to higher densities to the north and east. Therefore, staff recommends approval conditional of RZ 1814 and approval conditional of VC 1809, Part 1, and denial of Parts 2 and 3. In regards to the recommended conditions, it would be for townhouse attached dwellings and no more than 54 dwelling units at a maximum density of 6.38. Also, it should be in substantial compliance with the site plan received by our department on October 30th. And all areas which are not part of an individual lot and held in common shall be maintained by a mandatory homeowners association. And in regards to the variance, provide a 20-foot landscape buffer adjacent to property zone TR, and provide a 35-foot landscape buffer where no alley is shown on the site plan adjacent to TR, and a 50-foot undisturbed stream buffer adjacent to property adjacent to TR, townhouse residential, with hidden forests. Design and plant selection shall be approved by the city arborist. Provide a fence along the property line abutting single-family residential structures within hidden forest subdivision as approved by the design review board. And then in regards to requirements, dedications, and improvements, access to the site and frontage improvements shall be subject to the approval of the City of Milton Department of Public Works. And then provide sidewalks internal to the development and along entire Bethany Bend frontage and connecting to existing infrastructure on adjacent parcels as required or approved by the City of Milton Public Works. And so I'm here to answer any questions after that lengthy presentation. And then we do have comments from, I will have the applicant do their presentation, but if you have any direct questions right now, I'd be happy to answer those.
Anyone have questions for staff at this point? No? Thanks, Robin.
Okay.
We'll look forward to, as need be, after the applicant.
Okay.
Good evening. Steve Rowe with AEC 50 Warm Springs Circle, Roswell, Georgia. Robin's done such a masterful job on the site plan and going through it. Anything I would tell you would be a repeat of what she's already said. So I'd rather answer questions you may have regarding the site plan. And if you don't have any, I can turn it over to Carrie Kraus, our building architect, to walk through the necessity for the architecture variances.
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Rowe? And we will.
Right, and I'll reserve the rest of my time for rebuttal. So
Okay.
thank you.
Why don't we then have Ms. Kraus speak? Thank you.
Hello, my name's Carrie Kraus. I am the architect who conceptualized the neighborhood. And we probably don't need that. Just probably go straight to the architecture, the renderings. So this community was designed with Milton's vision to have diversity of economics, diversity of family dynamics. And so the variance of the 75% masonry became vital. It became an important issue for us to accommodate not only getting the architecture to have a diversity of price points within the units themselves, but also became important aesthetically. When you look at what's happening in architecture today within Alpharetta, within Buckhead where I reside, within Forsyth County, you're seeing a lighter feel, less heavy masonry. And that being said, I think the most important component to making that aesthetically pleasing and long-term classically relevant to architecture is having each unit consistent. So what we've seen in the past, and you can drive all over around here, you'll see a facade of brick on the front and you'll see siding of some sort on the sides and the back. That's nothing that we want to recommend and nothing we want to see in our community. We have kept the integrity of each unit, even though they share common walls. We kept the integrity of each unit to look aesthetically unique. We created a village effect, if you will, and you're seeing this all over. You're seeing it at Voisey, you're seeing it at Vickery, you're seeing it in downtown Alpharetta. This is a very appealing, relevant way of approaching multifamily. So, or townhomes, I should say specifically for this zoning. So that being said, I did partner with Tracy Ward, who I'm sure all of you are very familiar with. He's done a lot of work in your community, and we've created a community we're very proud of. And the design review board that we presented to on the 4th was extremely impressed and inspired by the project as well. It is different from what his code, 75% masonry, but it is aesthetically relevant and classically oriented in architecture. So that being said, we do have a lot of very interesting masonry applications. We have fireplaces, we have water tables, we do have some units completely all stone, some units completely all brick. What we did do is infiltrate some shiplap siding, some board and batten, and some other architecturally relevant design to Milton. I heavily researched Milton's history. I'm not from here, but I did take an interest in it agriculturally, and the equestrian lifestyle. The aesthetic to the community basically embraces the history of Milton. I don't know when the brick and the heavy masonry became part of your plan or part of your aesthetic, but I can say when you look back at photography, you look back at old designs, I went through quite a bit of the plans that were approved through different periods of time here in Milton. There is some relevance to what we're doing to your history. So, that being said, we are requesting a variance on the 75% for multiple reasons. So I'll let you ask questions at this point if you have any.
I had a question about, so you were saying price points. So what do you think the difference in the price points are?
Fantastic question. So,
Excuse me, I'm sorry. It'd be easier for them to finish it and then to ask questions because I want to see if there's anybody from the audience as well. And then we can go back to the applicant.
okay. So disregard the question. Or
I mean, you can
answer?
go ahead. I stopped the clock, but.
So to answer your question, what's really cool about this community, and I'll run you through these slides. The widths are very different. So you know how a lot of townhome communities, I'm sure you've seen them, they are just like a row of one elevation, and it's the same exact width in each unit. This is completely unique. We have some that are 20 feet wide, 24 wide, 30 wide, 35 foot wide, 45 wide, and 50 wide. So we created a lot of complexity and layers to this community. And that being said, too, to answer your question, to get that diversity of family dynamics, we have a lot of the units can have master level en suites on the first floor as well as living. So a lot of that was thought through, but with having those 20-foot units and those 24-foot units sprinkled in between the larger units, that's what creates that income diversity, that economy diversity. So you can look at a unit in the middle, a 3-story little unit in one of the town rows. I call them the town rows in the back. Here we go. You can see that right there, that unit will more than likely rest somewhere depending on the market and when this project launches, but that can rest anywhere from $450, $500, and then some of these wider units can go as high as $700 to $800. So it's been designed intentionally to allow that economic diversity. So I'll just flash through all these. That one on the end is one of the 50-foot units. And then you see in the back, we did keep more of the row house feel, the smaller units to the back, so that from the street, which was very important to the city architect, he had a lot of say, and we certainly listened and actually accommodated all his feedback. We kept the front nicely sized and oriented to the street, lots of sidewalks. It's definitely pedestrian friendly. And so, any other questions?
So we need to keep the questions until after.
Hold the questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you're more than welcome when we get to questions to answer them, so. But if you're done with the presentation, okay. So anybody else want to speak from the community? Anybody here? Okay, I just want to make sure, I don't want to leave anybody out.
Are you asking for in favor, Robin, or in opposition?
Or in opposition. So I only have cards from the applicant and their engineer and architect. So I just want to make sure if there was anybody else who wanted to speak that I didn't get the card. Okay, so we have no other speakers.
Okay, we'll close public comment.
Okay.
Okay, so questions from the table for staff or for the applicant?
I had a question for staff about in the presentation, obviously it said that already the schools are over capacity. Mm-hmm. And again, with this development, that's not going to help the situation. So, I mean, what can we do about that, or what is the recommendation with the school system? How do we address something like that? Because it's already over capacity, and more development's going to come. What are we going to do about that?
To be honest, we can't, I mean, it's a consideration in your decision, but it can't be the sole reason for a recommendation of denial. I believe that, so the schools, if I look at the numbers, the estimated generated students for Cogburn Woods is 3 to 15. That's a huge guess. I don't know where they come up with these numbers. But the Hopewell Middle School is 0 to 8, and then the high school is 1 to 14. So it's a huge range. It's not, but it's just something that the Board of Education planners have to deal with, and they can, as far as I understand, they can only plan with what's on the ground and the existing number of children. So, and to be honest, I think I've mentioned this before, the demographics are, especially for the elementary side, is that the number of children being born, if you look at the demographics, are going down. And I'm not saying, obviously there's people moving into the city or into the school districts, but I believe it's not such a huge issue as it maybe was 10, 15 years ago, where you just had, my kids are in college now and all my friends had hordes of kids and now everybody's having 1 or 2. So That's just something to think about. If you look at articles in the Milton Herald, the Board of Education state that the demographics are changing and the number of children per household are going down. But again, it's a long answer to your question that we really can't make a decision solely based on overcapacity of the schools. So, but I do have communication with the school planner, and it's really difficult in Milton because we don't have a lot of rezonings. We just have development. So a lot of times they get the knowing what's coming down the pike with the rezoning request, whether it's Roswell or Alpharetta or Johns Creek. And so in our case, I try to do the best as possible to give them final plats like Francis Road. I mean, they had no idea that might become 7 lots. And that's not a decision. There's no decision made whether that should be approved based on the number of children that would be produced out of that subdivision. So anyway.
Okay. That was it, Smeet?
Yeah.
Okay. Fred, any questions?
Yes. Do the private drives, I think you said, have the sidewalks, that you intend to have sidewalks?
I'll have the applicant come up, the engineer.
On the internal drives, we're going to have more unit access sidewalks, but maybe not at all connecting in the center of it because it would eat into more of the green space we want. We want to save the sidewalks and the walkability more for the specific areas we want, like within the parks, within the general green space locations. Let me see if I can get to that image here. So we would probably have a sidewalk network through here, another little sidewalk network here. You can see the sidewalks along the front will connect out and through, and we'll connect our green spaces, but there may not be a sidewalk to every square inch of this. The one thing I did want to point out is there is a nice network of green space within the floodplain, so we would kind of work in a natural mulch trail through there for dog walk areas, just nature enjoyment.
Okay.
Do you have an intended speed limit for what's customary in a development like that?
Since these are all going to be low-speed roads, there's probably going to be some paver areas for stormwater quality and some things along there. So, I mean, we're thinking 15 miles an hour or less. It's going to be very, very low.
All right.
As it relates to the sidewalks, Fire Marshal indicated a minimum of 26 feet. And in 2 instances, we're at 26, then we're at 22.
Yep. We're intending no on-street parking in the fronts of these units. So all the parking will be either in garages, driveways, or in the alleys themselves. So we won't have there'll be no on-street parking within the areas where the fire marshal needs access.
Okay, and to that, since you mentioned fire marshal, and looking at the print on the private drive in the middle, I don't see a way if a emergency vehicle is at location 1 or 54, the ability to turn that emergency vehicle around.
We've actually created areas where there's more than 150 feet where they can't back up. There's alley areas where they can back into the alley and pull out, similar to this location, same thing. And then over here, we've got a similar situation where actually they could traverse through that alley if they needed to.
Okay, so what is the reasoning for the alley?
For rear garage access, we want the fronts of the units to be clean architecture without garage doors. We're trying to tuck all the garage doors to the back.
And just to say that any townhomes that front a public street like Bethany Bend, they have to be rear loaded.
Right.
But that was just that's what we have in form-based code, so we're just kind of trying to.
Okay, so even though now is that alley going to be paved?
Yes.
Yeah, it'll be paved. Yeah.
Yes, it will be paved.
What's the width of the alley street? Is it 12 feet? Is
The
that
alleys are anywhere from 12 to 15, but a lot of times we'll do grass pavers in excess of that for maybe some off-street parking if the fire marshal does need to get back there, so it's a little wider drive surface. But we're trying to keep the pavement to a minimum as much as we can.
How have you provided for visitor parking?
A lot of the areas, a lot of the garages are in excess of 18 feet, so we can fit 2 cars side by side in the garages. In the alleys, we're going to work in some on-street or parallel parking in the alleys where we can't fit a deep enough space. But we're trying to keep all of the parking off the streets in front of the units themselves.
If there was parking in those areas that you suggest, would emergency vehicles be able to transit the neighborhood as you just described?
Yes, we would make sure that any parallel spaces would be off of the actual drive surface, so they would be set off. There's only one area where the fire marshal may need to get back, and it would be in this alley here. I'm not sure if you can see
That's the one you pointed to.
Yeah, would be this area. But these are where we have long driveways, so we may be able to fit all the guest parking off the driveway or off the alley itself. And again, those are some of the details we work out as we go through the permitting process with the fire marshal.
Okay, because at first blush, it doesn't seem like you have much.
Right.
Okay. Answered the driveways. Were streetlights proposed in this?
We'll have streetlights. We just haven't gotten to that granular level of detail yet. And as we permit it, we'll have to show full photometrics. So
That's all I have at this time.
Okay, Kurt?
I guess I just had more of a clarification when it comes to density. Right now, the way I see this is based on zoning, there's really 2 parcels. One is AG1.
Right.
That's, roughly, about 3.5 acres?
There and abouts, yes, sir.
And then we've got the townhomes, which is roughly 5 acres.
Right.
And it's my understanding that based upon the senior housing, that it is currently zoned on the 5-acre land for 19.84 residences on that.
Correct.
And on the AG1, obviously with 3, you're looking at maybe 3 homes. So, if I do the math, based upon the way it's zoned today, there could be 103 residences, including senior family.
That's correct.
And I think by changing the AG1 and removing the senior residencies, we're going to 54 residences.
That's correct.
And I think, too, when you start looking at the Milton Comprehensive Plan, that says that it's okay to have 5 or more.
Right.
So I guess I kind of view this, and it's more of a sanity check of this is, in a lot of ways, density neutral to me. Because you had 103, which included a vast majority of elderly,
Right.
which is 1 or 2 habitants. Now you've got 54, which is families, 3,
Right.
3 plus. So I kind of see this as density neutral when it comes to that.
Yeah, and I think the scale of this development is going to be a lot less than the intensity of the senior was going to be. The senior is going to be a stacked flat product, which is a little bit more intense with parking underneath. So this is going to be a little less impact to the area.
Okay. Let's see, what else did I have? And I think we heard about the requirement for the vertical wall, the 75% vertical wall plane. I think the main result of that is to give it a lighter look.
We're trying to give it a lighter look and be more in keeping with the vernacular of the historic Milton area of the farmhouse look and a little less of the heavy. I mean, the masonry is good, and if it's used strategically within the architecture, I think makes a lot of sense. But to mandate 75% of it just makes it a very heavy look that we really want to be more in keeping with the surrounding residents around us.
Okay. I think, and the other question I have is I know on some of the drawings it shows potential trees, and it looks like the area is fairly heavily treed now.
It is. There's a lot of volunteer pines along a lot of the areas. The one thing I did want to point out is there's a large grove of water oaks in this area that we are preserving in front of the stormwater management area, and those will be saved. And as we speak, we're having the tree survey updated. So we're going to assess the health, and so if there's other trees that we can work around within the site, we'll do that as well.
Okay.
It only helps.
That was one of the citizens' concerns. If you look at the drive-in, it goes straight through to the homes behind that.
Right.
I know one of the things was how do you cut down the
Right.
street or the car lights?
Well, the neat part about the way the site will grade, this is actually a slope down. So this will be up at street level. The garages will be a drive-under garage. So then the headlights will be looking into this park area, and then we'll have heavy landscaping to the back. So I really don't think there's going to be any issue with visibility between those two developments.
I'm sorry, would you say that again about where the drive-under garage?
In these areas, the grade is falling through here naturally towards Hidden Forest. So these would be up at Bethany Road, and then the garages would be located underneath behind.
Okay.
So they would actually, I would lose 9 feet of grade there, so I would be able to tuck that. But it helps with the way the cars would maneuver, and so you don't have headlights just streaming out into nowhere.
That's all I have, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
You said this was like similar to the other one. Is it private roads? Is it going to be gated?
These will be private roads, but we cannot gate it.
Cannot gate it? Okay. And will this be done, I mean, I could know this, the circle or the roundabout, will that be done before this is started?
I'm praying.
Suppose it's not. I mean, I guess suppose it's not
Well,
done.
let me give you a little history, because unfortunately I'm the engineer of the roundabout.
Okay.
And I know more than I should about it. AT&T was a little bit of a holdup in moving some of their poles. They actually yesterday finished doing that work and turned it back over to my client, who's going to finish the construction. We're trying to get the contractor on board and get it started, but once he starts, they're about 5 months out from getting it totally finished, buttoned up, landscaped, and paved.
Okay.
So I think probably within the next 4 to 6 weeks, you'll see construction start, and I think by early summer we'll be done and out of there.
Okay, so that will be done before.
That will be ahead of our schedule.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Because our access is critical that circle be done.
During the preamble to your presentation, it was mentioned you might have a traffic study you could share.
We've done some traffic counts. We've got some monitoring. Our impact to that intersection is less than about 4%. But right now I'm going through trying to get some modeling done of the traffic circle, which is a little bit more intense. So I'm working with Sarah at the city, and we're working through what the parameters of that modeling needs to look like so she can get a comfort level of it, so our ingress and egress.
The measurements that you took, when did you take them?
The traffic counts from Bethany Road and Morris Road came last year about this time, so they're about a year old. Married that against the ITE numbers for our traffic input for an average daily trip and for the peak hours. I realize that traffic on that road is a little rough in the mornings, rough in the afternoons, but a lot of that's partly from construction, and a lot of it is I think as the construction moves on and this circle gets into place, that'll help alleviate some of those issues.
I'd like to go back to the request of the applicant to eliminate the undisturbed buffer and the improvement setback.
Yes.
And I don't understand the reason for the request.
Because of the shape of the property, and when you take the 75 feet, which is really an overlay requirement, not a zoning requirement per se between two zoning, because we're very similar zoning districts between these two, it moves this line from here to almost at this road. So it makes it so the economics of the development don't work, and then the grading and everything else, it becomes almost impossible to get a development in there with what I'm left as a sliver running through there. It renders this piece almost totally undevelopable. Parts of this become very difficult, and so it's really a development issue. And we're trying to honor the buffer between the two developments. We're working with Hidden Forest, so as we come up with landscape plans, we found that each of these different homeowners has a different tone and tenor of what they want to see there. So we'll be working with each one of them so that the buffer behind their house will be in what they're looking for, whether it be magnolias, cryptomerias, different landscape material.
It just strikes me that the folks that bought those houses anticipated that there were going to be these sorts of buffers there. And undoubtedly your client knew this when the requirement for the buffers when the property was purchased or assembled.
Can I interject? So the previous application for the use permit, they also asked for the variance for the buffers. So what happens though is if a development is not constructed or started within 36 months, they lose the variance. So in the previous application, the same variance was requested and it was granted in 2008 for the previous previous development proposal. But obviously, this is a new proposal, so it is a new situation, but just want to clarify that even those houses were being built around the same time as the rezoning, and maybe some of them were occupied after the rezoning. So anyway.
I'm still having, well, I understand the history. Thank you very much for that. I wasn't aware of that before you shared it. But I'm still having difficulty understanding why the applicant, who in part, it's the logic of the rationale for accepting this or recommending approval for it. You cite the irregular nature of the property. I believe you cite also the wetlands. Those were all there when the applicant bought the property. And I'm just having difficulty understanding why we should grant this. It doesn't strike me as a hardship if he knew he was cobbling together something that looked like
and
this.
Is the development contingent upon the variance? Is it a contractual arrangement? So if the variances are not granted, the sale will not go through? Is it contingent upon
I wanted
the?
to speak a little bit about that hardship because I've spoken at length with Bob, the city.
You might want to get closer to the.
I wanted to speak on the hardship case because I'm not sure if you're aware the zoning and the foreign-based zoning around this area. There's only a couple land areas left that kind of felt in this weird situation where they weren't foreign-based zone and they're stuck in where they are, which is almost Neverland. The property is shaped oddly. Stephen and I have created so many different site plans to make this work without the buffer, but it is impossible to do anything substantial other than using density, which is not anything we want to do. And we have it. I mean, we have approval to have massive, an extreme amount more density to this land. But we're trying to avoid that. We're trying to create
senior housing?
Senior housing, or even, I believe we're within the current zone, we were allowed up to 9 per acre, and we're only using 5, 6?
Well, on the
6.
On the TR section, but not the AG one.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
a question for staff. If this does not proceed for whatever reason, what can they build on this property today by right?
So it would be they have the use permit for the senior housing with the TR. They would have to go back to the Board of Zoning Appeals to ask for the same variance for the buffer, because that has gone away with the time. But they preserve their right for the density of the senior housing. And I just want to say, and I think Mr. Jones is going to say, is it's the same property owner. They've had this property the whole entire time. So there is no contingency with anybody. This is their property they're trying to do.
If I could just address that for a moment. Corey Jones, I live at 14430 Wyndham Farms here in Milton. So we assembled this in 2007. We brought it through zoning for its current entitlement. We did not close on the property until it was entitled. So we had it under contract. It took me 18 months to bring everything through. City Council approved it, and then within 3 or 4 weeks we actually closed, and so we owned it at that point. So we did not just buy it in hope that we would be able to build something on it. We got it entitled, and consequently it was 2008, and the economy did this, and we got stuck with it. And we've been stuck with it this whole time, and we're looking at, it's difficult to build senior development there because there's really nothing to walk to right now. Eventually, and we knew there would be back then, restaurants across the street, retail shops, that type of thing. But without that there, we struggle, and the expense of building something like what we're entitled to build. So we're just looking at this. One of the things you'll notice is we're not stuffing it with density. It's a very beautiful, in fact, Carrie Krause, an environmental architect, and I really gave her the reins. I said, make this beautiful. Make it somewhere where people really want to live and can be a village. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, the green spaces were extremely important to me as an environmental architect. They are scattered all throughout this community, this development, places where, instead of having to go to a centralized park, like a lot of developments are designed, we created these little moments all throughout where neighbors within that space can come together. So because of that, we did not use the amount of density that we have at our disposal. So that buffer is extremely important, that variance. It's interesting how we're talking about green space within this buffer, but in order for us to have green space within the community itself, we need that variance. So.
Is the green space that you're intending, Ms. Krause, the natural green space? Will it be a groomed area, or is it going to be?
It's both. We'll have this natural green space here, which won't be improved except for some trails, but then we'll have some more manicured parks within it, kind of for passive recreation, maybe some slight active recreation, throwing a baseball, football.
So what's the
frisbee.
largest area looks like the area just in sight line from the roundabout coming in?
Yeah, we've got a nice linear park here. There's also a nice one here. It's a little deceiving because the units are so much bigger, but this is probably even a little bigger than this. This park is
what kind of space are we talking about? Is that
Yeah.
quarter of an acre? Or is it
Yeah, this is about 100, 120 by probably 150. This is probably 80 by 150, and then probably 60 by 150 through here.
And you're showing them as treed here.
Yes.
But you also then talked about it a moment ago about it being a potential for active use area.
Well, it's you see we've got a sidewalk through there, but then there'll be some green spaces to the side and some flat lawn areas worked within these. Again, we haven't gotten to the granular level of detail on these, but just some ideas of these are improved spaces meant for the enjoyment of the residents and also to help break up the facades of the units as you run down Bethany Road.
I'll tell you where I struggle a little bit, and I understand completely. When you're at this point of your development, you can only have anticipated so much. But when so the challenge we've got as a planning commission is to ensure that when we're being asked to grant a variance for something, that we get some pretty absolute answers out of those. So we have to blend those two needs. Your need to be conceptual at this point, and our need to be as granular and as absolute as possible when we're suggesting, okay, we're in support or we're going to deny something based on those absolutes, especially when a variance is required.
Right.
So please understand some of our hesitance or maybe the line of questions that some of us are going
No.
It's
It's
because we have to
process.
overcome that battle. That's the challenge that we're given as the planning commission, is to ensure that we're one level of protection for what the community is expecting.
And we've been working hand in hand with the community members behind us to make sure that they're in concurrence with it, and they understand why and that they're happy with the end result. It's as important to us as it is to them and you.
May I add something toward the hardship question? When we closed on this property, the floodplain was further down, and so we actually had a lot more buildable area. Where you see the blue pond right now, that is actually the very edge of the floodplain now. In 2013, FEMA changed the floodplain. They raised it on us, so we lost about
Another acre.
about an acre of our building area. So we closed on this thing, believing we had so much space, and then because of the recession, it hit us. We couldn't control it. 2013, FEMA did that. We couldn't control that. We lost another acre. So it's been one hardship after the other, actually.
I think it's also important for you guys to know that before we even designed Malou, we met with the community of Hidden Forest and a Kroger as just a community event, just to let them know what we're thinking about, to ask, give them a platform to communicate what they want to see. So we've had 3 I believe, 3 meetings, like town hall-esque meetings with our neighbors. And so, yeah, this buffer didn't come, this variance request didn't come easy by us, but we really are at a crossroads on it. So.
Ron, more questions?
No, I think I've heard enough.
Okay. I have several.
Okay.
I guess one of my first questions is, at the point of groundbreaking, is it your intent to develop 100% of it, or is it going to be a phased development?
We would probably develop 100% of the infrastructure, the roads, the stormwater, but we would phase the units, and probably the neat part about this is we're going to have several price points, several sizes, so we'll be able to be working in different areas and work this out. But we would obviously phase something this big. I'm not sure how many phases, but as we got closer to that, we would be able to detail that out.
And so maybe too early to ask what your expectation is, but what do you think total build-out time is from A to Z, if it is a phased development?
5 per month. I mean, it could go as quick as a year and maybe stretch out to 24 or 28 months.
Okay.
Depending on.
Part of the reason I asked that is because of the impact on the infrastructure and
Right.
in schools in particular. I know, Robin, the chart that's the Fulton County chart, that's generated by the numbers are
Correct,
generated by
yes.
Fulton County.
It's from
correct?
Fulton County Board of Education planner, so they have a planning department within the
Yeah,
board.
that's why I struggle with the fact that it's 3 to 47 or something like that on the student
Well,
impact.
Quite that much, but
3 to 14.
yeah, I think 3 to 4. It's still a big span.
It's a big space, yeah,
Yes.
it
You
is.
know what's really interesting about these type of communities, though, Voice Say, there's a lot of community development like this, and I did a lot of reading on Milton's website when I was designing an initial concept. There's a big baby boomer influx in Milton. I mean, the age is increasing of your citizenship here, and so we actually are designing them in that light. I believe you'll have some starter up, executive couple that commutes to the city. But for the most part, I see it to be more of a middle-aged to upper demographic.
So you kind of did that by not putting amenities in to attract families? So is that one of the reasons? Let's say there's not a
We used to
pool,
have
things like that.
space.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, we're finding that the green space and the open areas are actually more of an amenity than pools
Than a pool?
and some things, because they become problematic and upkeep and some things like that. So the green space and the walkability seems to be more of an amenity than anything lately.
Yeah, I'll go on record again, Robin. I just think that Fulton County's got to find a better way than this chart that we consistently complain about, because the numbers, there is no way to really grasp the number. And to be frank, the historical math would have said 54 residences. I haven't asked the question yet about anticipated square footages, but it would lend itself historically to a family setting where you're not likely to have 1 or 1.5 kids. You're more likely to have 2 or 3, and then the math is wrong for what they're expecting.
And square footage, we actually have run some numbers. Square footage can rest anywhere around 2,100 up to 3,800.
Okay. And then that impacts the parking plan too, to your point, whether it's an aged community that is 50s buying this, there may still be some teenager drivers in that community. And to someone's questions earlier, I am concerned about the parking plan, because without some space, and it's not depicted on here, which may be by design at this stage of your development, without understanding where some of that parking could go, I'm concerned that it could be happenstance, and heaven forbid the happenstance is unmonitored, and then you do have an emergency situation, and whether it's first responders in ambulance or in fire, they can't get there. And we've got a tragedy in our hands that we designed. Last thing I want to do is design a tragedy. So I encourage you to seriously contemplate your parking either being better designated for everybody's ability to grasp and understand how we can mitigate that concern for safety, or contemplate a reduction in a density point here or there to get to the point of dedicated parking.
And we can come up with a parking number if that's something that.
You know, driveway depth is important. You guys have addressed part of it by driveway depth, but that.
Not everywhere, though.
You know, it's, and you hate to say it out loud, but it's the truth about here, is the affluence of this area does mean that there are more cars than you might find in other more rural areas, because people have the money for kids to have cars.
Right.
So it's something we have to take seriously when we're talking about this.
Okay.
We talked about the, one of the things that staff is recommending that we not approve is the materials.
Right.
And I don't really have a grasp yet from what you've described for me about what the materials would be. I mean, what our design standard calls for today is a lot of natural application of brick or well, brick is manufactured, but stone and some of those kinds of things.
Masonry.
And so if I heard you correctly, you used a couple of terms, shiplap siding, and I think it was board lap siding?
Board and batten.
Board and batten siding. Now, I have
Typical specifications for barns, farmhouse, that sort of.
But manufactured, it's not wood, is it? Is it a composite of some kind?
Actually, that goes along with pricing these out. This was our first rendering. There's a lot more natural wood going to be used in the actual end product. So while you may see a lot of white and the charcoal, there will also be some natural cedar siding as well, bringing in some of that natural, rustic, modern feel. So yeah, there'll be a lot more of the wood siding, the wood board and batten sprinkled between the painted finishes. What's fascinating is you can use masonry, you can use brick in Milton, but you can also paint it. So
right.
It's just
but
texture.
One of the things that I want to make sure that we guard against, I think, is I think Robin, like hardy plank.
Right.
What's the manufactured version of that we were trying to make sure we didn't have?
The cement board.
I mean, hardy plank
hardy
is the
board.
That's the type. That's
Is that what it
Kleenex
is?
tissues. I mean, it's
Yeah. We were trying to limit some of that and get to some of the more natural things. And, well, brick, although manufactured is a more consistent look, you can have an expectation of what the finished product will be. I want to make sure that, if and you're recommending denial of that section, if we were to overcome the denial on that, it really probably would require that we create a list. And I don't know that by list today, other than saying, like you said, shiplap or what was the second one? I'm sorry.
Board and batten.
Board and batten. I don't know what those are to be able to say I can say.
Here, let me.
So let me just interject here that it's not about being natural, because I think it's not very. I'm not an architect, and Bob isn't here, but even in our form-based code here in Crabapple, as well as form-based code in Deerfield, we allow the non-natural. You don't really, other than cedar shake, you don't really use natural materials as the surface of a building.
Right.
So you were starting to say that you wanted to encourage. I would say that you might want to encourage natural colors and earth tones versus wood slapped up on the side of a building. I don't think
I'm
that's
struggling with the
long-term.
concepts. I'm struggling for the right
Here.
words to describe my concern.
Let
But
me
my
go to that
concern is
other-
moving too far away from the things that had been contemplated, measured, carefully written into our ordinances, so that we don't, by happenstance, create something that we didn't expect by moving away from the things that are in there. So in that case, your suggested denial is
I
probably in
think-
keeping with the concern that I've got, I guess is what I want to get to. And if I were to make an effort to go away from that, to provide the requested variance by the applicant, I'd have to know what I'm.
Exactly, and I think that's not the reason for the recommendation for denial, but if you were to decide to continue to consider the variance, I think we highly need to have more detail about what is going to be on the buildings. And
Yeah.
that is, even though that's not the reason for the denial, but I don't think that they've developed their design enough for you to feel, even if you chose to recommend approval of it, we need something to approve.
Yeah.
So even though I didn't say that in the report, I think that's really where I don't feel comfortable for you to recommend approval on something we don't know what you were
Yeah,
approving.
and that's where I'm going to. I'll make a couple broad brush stroke comments, then come back to the more specific concern, and that is, I think you guys have got a really interesting concept. I don't think we have anything like this in Milton today, and yet I think that there is a real need for something like this. It bridges a lot of the things that we've expressed as concerns in our more recent history about spanning a price point, but also making sure that we do something aesthetically pleasing. I think you're introducing a concept that is in keeping, or to a certain extent, like a Vickery application, which is not this, but yet has a Vickery feel to it, a sense of village, which we like to have that sense of place here. And yet you're asking us to test our parameters a little bit on some of the things that you're asking for. And it's not easy for us to go there when we so carefully have built these things over the years to get to where we are.
And I think the thing to point out is if we were not in the Highwayland overlay, that a lot of these would have been done, and we can work with the city on the vernacular that we're looking to do. I think the issue is, throwing a 75% masonry on a building kind of takes away from the design flexibility and the uniqueness and the neat aspects we could do, where throwing in board mat, throwing in a variety of materials, lightening up the look, whether it be colors, materials, just shadow lines, things like that. But when you're kind of limited to masonry, it really limits your design aspect.
Mm-hmm. And we're limited to this 75% because I'm not sure if you're aware, this is zoned urban on top of it. So there's an urban component that we're working within that's not even relevant to residential. So it's an unusual land zoning.
Yeah.
I wanted to show you the inspiration images real quick so that you can get a feel. See that texture there? That's a patinaed gray cedar. There'll be some use of that. That charcoal that you see in the rendering is actually wood that has been stained gray. A lot of wood shutters. The first slide was a wood garage doors. All the garage doors are going to be very unique, but more stained wood versus what we're seeing everywhere else. Wood lentils. Lots of interesting components. Again, the wood lentil, the wood shutter. Again, the wood stain versus... I agree with you. I do not like hardy board at all, and I'm a Florida girl, and we see it everywhere, but because of climate. But I'm not a fan of it either. Wood framed windows. There'll be a lot of components of that. Wood awnings. Again, that wood sign. That there's pine painted. It's not hardy board. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to show you a little bit of that. That's one of the green space. The little green spaces are really going to be like gathering areas. There'll be a fire corral. There'll be all kinds of little neat benches and seating, and again, more wood. What's fascinating, if I actually did a study on what we're considering for each elevation of each unit, I dare say we're actually really close to the 75%. We just didn't want to... We didn't want to force that on ourselves and restrict ourselves. That's why we're asking for the variance. Quite a few of the units are all stone, all brick. The water table throughout is a stone. The fireplaces are all stone. There's a lot of masonry in this project.
Right.
So.
Okay, thank you. It sounds like you've already engaged Bob, and that's
Yes.
a really important aspect of this, because the creativity that it looks like you've got combined with the creativity that he brings to the table, I'm pretty convinced if this is approved that you guys can find a match. And it may not be that you get the variance that you're looking for tonight, but your continued work with Bob may end up producing that as an end result.
Can I ask one thing just on top of that?
Sure.
I know with it's going to be a lot of stone, but with the wood and everything like that, there's going to be more maintenance. Is the exterior maintenance going to be covered by the HOA, or is that going to be
Yes.
so that gives me a little more comfort that
it's definitely
it's not going to be the individual homeowners
You know,
The HOA will control the colors, they'll keep the wood, they'll keep the
Correct.
stain on, okay.
It's more of a lifestyle, you know, it's
Yep.
a lock and leave lifestyle
Okay.
within this.
Okay, that's better.
And just to clarify, you did say it was going to be a private road, so maintained
Yes.
by the ownership of.
By the HOA,
property.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thought I had a couple more questions.
Let me ask Robin something while you're thinking.
Sure.
So could you just clarify again, I couldn't remember, what's the minimum parking requirements though? for this?
So we require 2 parking spaces per unit. So, and I believe when we updated the TR, I'll have to double check, that they have to be inside the structure. So for the town, but I can double check on that.
And so right now, there are two car garage, and 2 off-site parking per unit?
No,
No.
it's just 2. There's
Just
no
2.
off-site.
No, but
So, yeah.
in some of the units with the deeper garage, we do have ample space for that. And looking at it, we do have other places we can add in some off-street parking. I'd probably do it as an alternative material so that it would add some interest, not just more pavement. You know, it would be pavers or grass pavers or something. But we can work in some additional parking if that becomes a concern.
Yeah, I think you may already have seen it. I think in Vickery, they have used pavers where it is grass in between them, or
Yeah,
I think it may
Mondo.
been done by private residences rather than as community or development installed. But I think that's another great potential solution for you guys to keep the more green and pervious surfaces.
Right.
To think about that. Is there any driveway in the mix that either by length or by width could not accommodate at least one additional vehicle?
There are some.
And let me clarify what I'm saying by width. I'm thinking again about Vickery being the example. There are some families that are 3-car families.
Right.
A 4th car would be a problem for them. They park their 2 cars in the garage. The 3rd car gets parked parallel to the garage doors.
And there's some areas where we've specifically gotten a shorter driveway because the problem you run into is if you've got a 12-foot driveway, somebody's going to inevitably try to fit the car, and then it's going to block the alley for everybody else. So we make it short enough so that doesn't become an issue.
So looking like 45 through 50 are probably not
Right.
enough depth to park as a standard. They have to be
Right.
parallel.
And like with this cluster of units here, it was really a choice. Now, I can always pull these forward and get our deeper garage, or I can add some off-street parking in this corner and some off-street parking in this corner and get the same aspect. So, that may be the thing that we just work with staff on how to better accommodate some guest parking.
Okay.
And so it is in the code, when we updated the TR, it says each unit shall provide 2 off-street parking spaces within the principal structure. So you couldn't just have a unit with no garages and then have them, they have to be inside the
So
structure.
read the statement again, please.
But it says 2 off-street parking.
Yeah, that's the part that's confusing. 2 off-street parking but within the structure.
Right.
Which is it?
Well, I mean, it's stating that
You're not parking on the street, you're parking within the
Yeah,
structure.
in
Yeah.
the structure, in the garage.
in the
And each unit
garage.
has a
Oh, so
2-car
not
garage.
off-street parking, meaning within the structure, not
Right, right.
not off-street parking.
Right.
Okay, that's confusing.
Each unit does have a 2-car garage, so we covered that within the structures.
Right. Okay.
So I think there's other townhouses further up Bethany Bend that only have 1-car garages, and so that's part of I think the reasoning behind it too.
All right, I'm almost done, guys. I'm sorry. My question is actually going to be for you, Robin. So in staff's part of the variance request that staff is recommending approval conditional, which is I guess the VC 18-09. That's relief from what would have been the senior housing. Is that a correct statement?
No, it's a relief from the buffer.
The buffers.
Relief from the buffer. So one of the questions that came to me as I was preparing then is how do we get from the senior housing part that was on probably the TR part of it before, right?
Correct.
That's
It's on
not
the
in
TR
AG1.
section, yes.
So that's a non-issue then. So it's really the AG1, there's no.
No, it's for the entire part, because what I said earlier was that if a variance is not utilized within 36 months,
Right, they lost
it
it.
goes away.
Right.
So we're asking for the variance over again. For the entire project.
Right, to include the AG1.
And to include the AG1. It's just pretend it didn't exist at all. So
Right.
we're asking for the entire, for the development itself.
So it, in VC 18-09, that's the buffer.
Part 1.
In VC 1809, parts 2 and 3, that's the use of the materials.
Correct.
So where in this is the variance for the change of the AG1?
That's in the rezoning section. When you talk, so in the description of the application, it says to request a rezoning, to rezone from TR and AG1 to TR.
Okay.
Okay, so you're taking the townhouse residential has the underlying zoning or, the densities that exist, and in addition to their additional parcels as you go further up Bethany Bend, our AG1.
Yep.
So we're going to take both those zoning districts and they're requesting it to TR because it's a different use.
Yep.
And you're enlarging the subject property.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right, I just wanted to make sure that was clear. It was not to me. All right. I think that completes my questions. Any others for?
Yeah, I have another question. I just wanted to, the 75%, is that per unit?
Per wall plane. No, it's like, so if you have 4 sides, so 75% for the front, the side, rear, or even if there was a jut out, for every plane, it has to be 75%.
So every
wall plane.
Again, is that like one unit, or here, you've got 3 or 4 units, different sizes? Is that all considered one?
So like the front, if they were all, let's say if they were all flush and the same, that would be 75 foot, but usually there's a little juxtaposition, so it's per wall plane. So it's, just pretend they were detached, and whichever one plane, it's 75 front, rear, side, whatever.
Right. No, the reason why I was asking, because I know you were mentioning that you thought that you were pretty close to 75%.
Yeah, because of those end units, each of those end units, which are the largest units, I don't believe in changing materials and in compensating that way. So each of those end units will more than likely, there's 3 sides, right? Because they share the 4th side, they'll be
They would
masonry.
meet, so those end units would meet it, but the other units would not.
Those
So
little skinny guys.
Yeah, it's when you have 54 units, to try to exactly say which units are going to meet it and not meet it, that's why the request was kind of a blanket, but they will, in all likelihood, be able to meet some parts of,
Definitely.
get close to
See,
that 70.
this is where it gets challenging for us, these little guys in the middle. Because we did take Bob's feedback and created elevation shifts from unit to unit, each wall is its own 75% requirement.
Right.
That's the trouble.
Yeah. And we encourage that, so it's, lose some, win some.
But what's interesting, Robin, is right now, I think, I'll just restate what I think I heard you say, is right now, staff's recommendation for denial on that component of the request before us is really based on a greater or a more granular definition of what their intended materials are going to be. Had they provided that, would you have theoretically recommended approval? And it's theoretical, I realize.
Theoretically, I think if you make the argument that I don't believe they still can meet that one requirement of they don't have a they could do it all in brick and stone. There's nothing physically keeping them from doing that.
Cost is what they
Okay,
said.
so now that may not be the
No.
preference.
It's more of an aesthetic.
It's an aesthetic, and that's one of the things I think that you have to look at variances as, we have a very tough variance standard. And when you get to aesthetics, and, I can make reasons and give good arguments why I think it's a good path to go down to, but if I look at what the zoning ordinance requires, I can't say that it meets that.
Yeah. No,
I
get
can't make an argument that they're stuck,
Right.
that they
Well,
can't
as we
meet
know-
that.
As we know, one of the most profound measures we're being asked to make when we're going to grant a variance is whether or not there's a hardship. And a hardship on that, to be very frank, from an aesthetic, is not a hardship. And so it's hard for us to say that we can grant that without some of the other things that will come along with it. So you can grant a variance. It's not necessarily a precedent setting, so it's not repeated time and time again. We've got enough history as a city that we can probably legally defend that, Paul, right? That these are not precedent setting. They are a one-off consideration, especially in the case of a variance request. So we don't have to be fearful of that. What we do have to be fearful is that we're not granting something that is, at this point, without the more granular level that Robin's asking for, something that we didn't intend. But I would propose, although this is not by any stretch of the imagination a motion, but it's maybe some guidance for our table this evening, is if we are making a motion that's in keeping with staff's recommendation, that does not preclude them from continuing their effort with Bob and the appropriate staff to still secure their variance at the mayor and council level, because we're just a recommending body, with the demonstrated information that they're asking for, and maybe then secure with your ability to go forward. So it may not be inappropriate for us to support staff's recommendation this evening on, as it's written, with the caveat that we encourage you to continue, and it's actually motivation for you to continue your work with Bob.
Bob and I and Robin have already discussed getting together to talk about our hardship points and what those will be at that meeting. So we've already dialogued over getting that in motion.
Great. Okay. Any additional questions, comments, or discussion?
No, I guess just in addition to that, I get the feeling that we're open to that, but by the code of the variance and by the letter of the variance, we kind of have to stick with that for what it is. And again, not having it specified what else it would be. I think that makes it hard for us not to go against staffs because we don't know what we're voting for, or we don't have any limitations or barriers around that.
The only thing I will say is one of the conditions does say to work with staff and making sure that you meet the aesthetic requirement within the city. So there is that fail-safe. If you were to grant that variance, there's another actually 2 layers. I've got staff, and then I have design review board. So there's actually 2 more hurdles I have to get over if we're not at that 75-25 ratio.
Yeah, all of which have more teeth than we have. So, I think you guys have brought forward something really interesting for us to consider. I really applaud the out-of-the-box thinking for this. I think it's a product that could be very successful in Milton, providing we get to some of those details that need to be gotten to from future opportunities to be in front of the city and staff. All right. With no additional questions or comments, I will entertain a motion. Anyone?
I'm stuck.
If you guys are stumped, the chair rarely makes the motion. I can. It's not inappropriate for me if nobody else is willing to come forward, but I'd rather not. If you guys can create a motion. All right.
It has to be a hardship. It can't be any other reason.
Well,
Correct? Okay. Go ahead then.
All right, so I will make a motion.
Hardship for all the variances.
Yeah.
The setbacks and buffers and the cosmetics that we've been talking about.
I think we established hardships for some of them, just not all of them.
Correct.
So, okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And by way of comment, I do think what you put together is lovely. I think we'd like to see more of this in Milton.
All right, short of a motion from anybody else on the table, I'll be happy to make a motion. I recommend that we support staff's recommendation for approval conditional of RZ 18-14, approval conditional of VC 1809 Part 1, and denial for VC 18-09 Parts 2 and 3, with the caveat that we look forward to the applicant working with staff, Bob in particular, to see if they can overcome that last part of the denial.
I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion? Ron?
Having heard the discussion here, I don't believe the applicant has established a need for the removal of the buffers.
Okay.
I think that the applicant knew of the size of and dimensions of the property when he purchased it, when expanded it. And the more recent change because of governmental redefinition of the floodplain is simply a business risk that I think the owner needs to bear. I don't think we should be changing. Since there is no hardship, I just don't see why we should be bailing a builder out.
Okay, thank you. Paul, I have a procedural question. I've made my motion and there's been a second and we've had some discussion on it. If I need to amend my motion with the fact that there's a second, can I just do that by asking for a withdrawal of my motion to make an amendment to, or can I amend it without it being withdrawn?
Well, an amendment needs to not be something that would essentially defeat the main motion.
Right.
So if it's truly a fine tuning, an amendment to the motion, you could certainly do that.
Okay. Okay. I'd just like to amend my motion then to add the caveat that I would like to require the applicant to work with staff on identifying some more clearly identified additional parking areas that could be considered public parking within the confines of the development. I would also just suggest that I acknowledge Mr. Gilbert's comments as well. They are appropriate and worth considering, and we ask that Mayor and Council consider Mr. Gilbert's comments as well.
Okay.
Right. So
Okay.
as such,
now there needs to be a second for the amendment. If there is going to be a second for the amendment, now is the time, and then you'll vote on the amendment, and then you'll vote on the main motion.
for the amendment, then on the main motion?
Correct.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay, thanks, Fred. So all those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so the amendment is added to the main motion. So the motion is now being heard for consideration. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Let the record show one opposed. All right, thank you. Robin, I think that is the extent of our agenda for this evening.
Yep,
Correct.
that's it.
All right, so is there a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.
Is there a motion to reconvene shortly?
Well, how do we,